I vow to abstain from sexual and romantic pleasures henceforth.
Pinto paced back and forth across their living quarter, nibbling at his nails.
How could you possibly be so reckless?
Yahshi leaned against the wall and crossed his arms.
Quacks spoke ill of me.
So? I don't like him either, but you went too far.
Pinto stopped and sat on his bed. With a sigh, he ran his fingers through his locks.
Honestly, Yahshi, you should be terrified. I wouldn't be surprised if the Guardians filtered you for misconduct.
Dr. Blimmery called off medical class over an hour ago. If the Guardians had plans to filter me, they would have done so by now.
You don't know that.
I gave Quacks a black eye 3 weeks ago, and he still selected me. I doubt they'll filter me for giving him another one.
Pinto raised his chin, meeting Yashi's gaze.
That was... you?
What? You don't believe I'm capable?
I didn't think you were the type.
What type?
You know, aggressive.
Yahshi rolled his eyes.
I don't understand why you're making such a big fuss about this.
Because you told Vell and I that we'd graduate together. The three of us. Remember that? I even helped you study for the exam. And then you go beating at Quacks, sabotaging your own spot in the program like you're in this alone? I thought we were going to help each other get to the final 5. I thought we were... friends.
Oh,
Yahshi looked at his boots.
I wasn't thinking about it like that.
Well, think about it a little more from now, will you? Come on, let's get lunch.
Yahshi and Pinto left room 4 to find Vell in the lobby. As they walked to the dining hall together, she repeatedly tried to tie her hair into a ponytail, despite it being too short every time. Her nervousness must have been contagious, because Pinto was biting his nails again. All eyes were on Yahshi as he entered the dining hall with Pinto and Vell. They grabbed their trays and took their seats. Quacks hadn't shown up.
Hey, Vell?
She didn't look at him.
What?
We could skip lunch and practice if you want.
I'll pass.
Pinto glanced at Yahshi, then at Vell.
I could practice with you instead.
I'm eating.
Is your shoulder better now?
I'm fine.
Yahshi couldn't tell if Vell was in a bitter mood because of the approaching final phase or because of what happened in the lab, but he didn't dare to ask. It was only after Vell took a sip of her beet juice when she lightened up, her eyes widening.
It's the second dose.
How do you know?
The aftertaste is a bit sweeter.
You've gotta be kidding me. Right when I'm feeling normal again.
Yahshi eyed a box of anti-serum under the serving table. Dr. Blimmery had set it there the day after their first dose, explaining that they could help themselves as needed. He stood to grab a vial for Pinto, but Vell stopped him by the wrist.
Don't take the anti-serum unless you think you may go unconscious. Otherwise, it's self-sabotage. Makes you throw up the serum before your body learns to tolerate it.
So during our first dose, I didn't learn to fight the toxins. Not at all.
A little.
This dose will be awful too, won't it?
Definitely.
Yahshi sat down with raised brows. He expected the news to outrage Pinto, but it actually seemed to calm him. Pinto understood exactly what to do to improve his tolerance. Suffer helplessly. No anti-serum, no relief. But a plan was a plan, and Pinto loved plans.
You'll want to finish your food first. It'll lighten the symptoms.
Huh.
Pinto narrowed his eye.
Look, as much as I appreciate the tips, I must ask, where does this knowledge of yours come from?
My brain.
Vell took a bite of her salad.
Yeah, Pinto, that's where thoughts are made.
I'm serious. Normal people don't know this much about plants.
None of us are normal. That's why we got selected.
You didn't answer my question.
Vell stared at Pinto with pursed lips before slamming her fork down.
It was for my mother, okay? I studied medicinal plants and natural remedies mostly. But if you read enough books, you'll stumble into all kinds of obscure information.
Pinto grinned, but Yahshi questioned Vell's answer. Her cheeks were red, and she had raised her voice in a defensive way, like she had something to hide. After they cleared their plates, Pinto took a few sips of beet juice and cringed. Vell drank hers in one steady stream.
What kind of monster are you? Poison or not, it still tastes awful.
Just hold your breath.
As Pinto struggled to finish his glass, Yahshi squinted at his own. On one hand, taking the second dose might ruin his performance during the final phase that afternoon. On the other hand, skipping the dose meant falling behind in tolerance training, and his body might respond horribly to the next one.
You're not drinking.
I'm thinking.
Yahshi tapped his fingers against the table.
Try holding your breath. Vell's right, it helps.
Yahshi shook his head.
I don't think I can risk feeling sick during the final phase. I'll have to sneak the glass back to my quarter. If I win, I'll drink the rest later.
You could have been kind enough to share that idea before I chugged it all.
I only thought of it now. It's your fault for drinking too fast.
You'll be fine, Vell. You hardly react.
It didn't take long for the other trainees to realize that the beet juice contained belladonna. KO was scanning the room with sudden jolts as though an invisible enemy were after him, while the Brackle twins were leaving to rest in their quarters. Sana only drank a third of his glass before snatching a vial of anti-serum and running from the dining hall. Pinto leaned forward, rubbing his forehead.
You should lie down before it gets worse.
I'll walk with you.
No, I'm fine. It's just a headache for now. I'll bring your glass up too.
Are you sure?
I can manage. The two of you should focus on getting your pins.
Pinto stood from the table.
Sana will likely be in bad shape, even after taking the anti-serum. Amal is a planner, but when his first plan falls through, he never has a backup. And Fern, well, he's small, but he can fight. Don't underestimate him. And either of you should be fine.
Pinto grabbed Yashi's full glass and headed for the door.
Wait! I just wanted to say thank you for making these last few weeks bearable.
Pinto looked back with a sigh.
Oh, don't make this a goodbye.
Yahshi and I could be paired against each other.
I know.
Then it could be goodbye.
Yeah, I know.
You'd be a perfect guardian, Pinto. I mean it.
Pinto smiled at both of them before making a hasty exit from the dining hall. Perhaps the night he cut Vell's hair would someday be nothing but the start of what could have been a lifetime of friendship. By the time the pinless trainees gathered for the final phase, the redness in Sana's cheeks had drowned his freckles. His hands were tucked into his pockets, but it was obvious they were shaking. Yahshi faced Vell next. She ignored his gaze with a gulp. To her left was Fern Irvine, who was a bit shorter and thinner than Yahshi. He certainly didn't look like a threat, but his bold, dark stare said otherwise. Yahshi observed Amal Travo last. Yahshi had seen him beat Quacks in an arm wrestling match a few days prior, so he feared Amal would be the most challenging opponent here. But as he studied him more closely, he noticed that he was blinking slower than normal, a sign of blurry vision.
This is the final phase. Anyone who does not earn their pin today will be filtered from the program. Yahshi KONYA, please enter the sparring range. Alone.
Yahshi bit his lip as he stepped onto the green zone. Commander Roz stood in front of him and raised his hands, not to fight, but to hold up his golden stopwatch.
Today you acted in aggression without permission from a guardian. The Academy is not like Citrus Secondary, where instructors may let that kind of behavior slide. You're here to train the right way, under guidance.
Yahshi braced himself for what he knew would be a personalized test.
You have 60 seconds to state your case. After your outburst this morning, why shouldn't we filter you?
Commander Roz clicked a button on his stopwatch.
You may begin.
Yahshi closed his eyes. He could feel the words weaving together, like the story was being carefully crafted by a source beyond himself. When he opened his eyes, he began to speak with a boldness that made Commander Roz raise a brow.
Commander, on our first day in the program, you paired me against Quacks for a defense demonstration. I lost to him because I consider him a close friend. And I would never hurt a close friend. But he's been tormenting me about my selection ever since. One of the vows every guardian makes before joining the force is to support their fellow guardians. A trainee like Quacks, who shuns other trainees, will graduate to become a guardian who shuns other guardians. I fought him today because he disrespected me. And I knew that without correction, he would never change.
You're treading on thin ice.
Quacks won a pin because of my deficits. But he lost today because of my strengths. It's only fair that I'm deserving of a pin myself.
Commander Roz clicked the button on his stopwatch again. His light nod implied that Yahshi hadn't surpassed the time limit.
With that being said, you did state your case well.
He stepped forward and attached a pin to Yashi's collar.
Congratulations.
As Yahshi returned to the group of trainees, he pulled his collar and smiled at the glimmering flower.
Sana Rickaby and Amal Travo, please enter the sparring range.
Sana's arms trembled as he raised them. But luckily for him, Amal's arms were shaking too.
You may begin.
While the match began, Yahshi grabbed Vell's hand and led her away from the sparring range, far enough so Fern couldn't overhear their conversation.
Fern doesn't look like a fighter.
Vell nodded.
But like Pinto said, I won't underestimate him.
I think he'll be the one underestimating you. He was sick during the second phase. He didn't see your close match against Limbo. This is the perfect opportunity to rush him and catch him off guard.
What do you mean, rush him?
As soon as the match begins, go after him with everything you've got.
They returned to the middle of the room to spectate. In the green zone, Amal was standing across from Senna, his face red in rage. His first plan must have fallen through, and like Pinto had predicted, he didn't have a backup. Senna grabbed Amal's wrists and pushed. Amal's elbows folded, his arms collapsing into his chest. He tried to free his hands, but Senna took a few steps forward and drilled him into the black zone. Yahshi wanted to cheer, but he contained himself.
Amal, you're filtered from the program. A guardian is waiting in the common room to escort you home.
Amal opened his mouth to protest, but despite his obvious effort to speak, he couldn't bring himself to do it. He closed his mouth and headed for the door. They all saw what happened to Durlin Ozo. After Amal left the room, Commander Roz attached a pin to Senna's collar.
Congratulations, Senna. Please see Dr. Blimmery in the infirmary for a quick checkup.
Senna nodded before making his way to the door. He could hardly walk in a straight line.
I wonder if he'll be in class tomorrow.
Vell PATURA and Fern Irvine, please enter the sparring range.
Vell left Yashi's side before he could wish her luck. He twisted the buttons on his vest as he watched her face Fern and raise her hands.
You may begin.
Vell took the initiative by sprinting after her opponent. Fern flinched before throwing a quick jab and cross. Vell ducked under them, maintaining her momentum. She launched herself at Amal and wrapped her arms around his waist. They flew out of the sparring range together. Yashi's jaw dropped as Fern's back struck the black zone. Vell landed over him, pinning him down. Commander Roz grinned. None of the other trainees this cycle had thrown themselves into the black zone with their opponent. Perhaps many others could have won their matches had they worried less about touching the black zone and more about who would touch the black zone first.
Fern, you're filtered from the program.
Vell jumped to her feet and offered Fern a hand, but he ignored her and stood on his own. He stormed out of the room, and by the time the door slid shut behind him, Vell's collar boasted a golden pin. Commander Roz nodded at Yahshi and Vell in approval before leaving, marking the end of their sparring filtration. Yahshi faced Vell to congratulate her, but she wrapped her arms around him before he could say a word. Yashi's eyes widened. He was about to hug her back when she pulled away, her palms lingering on his shoulders.
That could have been a disaster.
Yeah, it could have been.
When Yahshi reached room 4, Pinto was writing hastily in his journal.
How are you feeling?
Pinto stopped writing and stared at Yahshi in disbelief.
Forget about me.
He slammed his journal shut with a wide grin.
You're here?
I'm here.
And Vell?
She's here too.
Thank the stars! Where is she?
Lobby, talking to Senna.
Pinto immediately jumped out of bed and headed toward the door. He looked much livelier than he had after taking the first dose of Belladonna.
I need to congratulate her, and thank her for the Belladonna tips, and talk to her. I'll be back. I want to hear all about your match.
I didn't have one.
Oh, mysterious.
When Pinto shut the door behind him, Yahshi spotted a glass of beet juice sitting on his nightstand. He grabbed it and stepped out onto the balcony. The clouds were turning pink and gold, preparing for sunset.
I can handle the academy.
A gentle breeze caressed his face, nature affirming his hypothesis. He raised the glass and took a sip.
The Guardians only select the exceptional after all.
Belladonna, Book 1, Nightshade Academy. Written and narrated by Mel Torrefranca. Produced by Mel Torrefranca and Wilson Hensley. Edited and mastered by Juan Pablo Diaz.
How did we get here? Something went wrong. we worked hard for this life that we don't want at all.
Cover art by Mad Studio. Score by Gita Puspita Asri. Theme song composed and produced by James Sinclair-Stott. Starring Jason Brown, Anthony Andreas Echeverri, Philip Kryanov, Melissa White, Alex Bowie, Patrick Vierzba, Julia Risto, David John Bors, Connor Blanc, Cody Keel, Ellie Chua, Ben Autry, Walter Mack.
If it's really true that the sky weeps with us, if it's really true that heroes live in stars.
Featuring the voices of Gwyneth Evans, Jeff Rosenau, Lucas Hensley, Levi Titus, Angie Eggers, Willem Degar, Allison Prophet, Maria Palmo. Nightshade Academy is produced in association with Lost Island Press.
If it's really true, if it's really true, if it's really true, if it's really true.